Hello and welcome. I'm Thomas Porteous and you are watching Newsx World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories this hour. Israeli troops advance into the heart of Gaza City as the military launches the main phase of its operation, targeting Hamas's strongholds. Officials say between 2,000 and 3,000 Hamas fighters are believed to be operating in the city. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio leaves Doha after urging Qatar's Emir to remain a mediator in Gaza, even after Israel strikes on Hamas leaders there. Rubio says Washington fully backs Israel's campaign to eradicate Hamas, but warns only a short window remains for a ceasefire deal. A United Nations commission says Israel commits genocide in Gaza, carrying out 4 of the 5 acts defined in international law, including mass killings and starvation. Israel denounces the report as distorted, insisting its campaign targets Hamas and not civilians. A Russian strike on Zaporozhye kills 1 and injures several, as President Volodymyr Zelensky says over 3,500 drones and 190 missiles hit Ukraine this month alone. Amid the escalation, President Donald Trump plans to speak directly with Zelensky. President Donald Trump is set to arrive in Britain for a state visit centred on trade and technology, with Google announcing new AI investment there. The UK and US plan to sign a deal fast-tracking nuclear power projects, while royal pageantry unfolds at Windsor. President Donald Trump says Afghanistan, Bolivia, Burma, Colombia and Venezuela have failed to uphold counter-narcotics pacts, warning their US funding is at risk. He repeats accusations that Nicolas Maduro runs a drug network as the US strikes a Venezuelan vessel, killing 3. The United States and China agree on a framework to shift TikTok to US-controlled ownership, a move affecting 170 million American users. President Donald Trump and Xi Jinping plan to confirm the deal on Friday in a rare breakthrough amid their trade war. FBI Director Kash Patel is set to testify before the Senate Judiciary Committee, facing tough questions on the Charlie Kirk assassination probe and the handling of the Epstein files. Critics, including Trump allies, are to question his leadership of the Bureau. Now we start in the Middle East, where US Secretary of State Marco Rubio has departed Qatar for London after his stop in Doha, where he met Qatar's leader Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al-Thani to ask the Gulf country to stay on as a mediator in Gaza talks. This visit came as a week after Israel launched a strike in Qatar targeting leaders of Hamas. Earlier, Rubio had said in a joint presser with Netanyahu that the United States is going to encourage Qatar to play a constructive role in mediating the conflict in Gaza. During his visit to Israel, Rubio said that the United States backs Israel in its goal to eradicate Hamas. He said that Washington will provide unwavering support to Israel in achieving its goal in the Gaza Strip. After completing his visit, Rubio also said that there is a very short window of time for a deal to be struck between Israel and Hamas. He has said that the deal should end with Hamas demilitarizing and releasing all Israeli hostages. We're now joined by Dan Perry. He is a world affairs analyst and he joins us live from Tel Aviv in Israel. Thank you very much, Dan, for joining us here on the program. Dan, what are your thoughts of the words of Marco Rubio here, backing Qatar very much to stay as the mediator in this conflict, even after it was bombed by the IDF, and also, of course, after a direct visit and a direct meeting with Netanyahu, and just after Qatar condemned the strikes from the Israeli government?
to go back to business as usual, or at least a status quo ante last missile strike, and they continue to remain unclear about whether the U.S. really knew or didn't know, approved or didn't approve, is really offended or is not offended. It remains completely unclear, and many of us are highly skeptical that Israel would have struck Qatar with a missile had the U.S. not approved, even though the U.S. claims otherwise right now. You would think if the U.S. were telling the truth about how Israel caught them by surprise, then Netanyahu would have been in for a lot of criticism by Rubio when it came to Israel, but that did not come to pass. What did come to pass is the U.S. forcing Netanyahu to sort of, knees bent, schoolboy in the corner, say it was all my idea and I did it on my own. But that was it. That's it. And there's no price to be paid for Israel, as far as I can tell. Nor is Israel particularly damaged by the result of the conference in Doha on Sunday, and especially yesterday, which was a summit where all of Israel's Arab allies joined Qatar in condemning the action and making threats like that it threatens the future of peace and things like that, but nothing particularly concrete. So it sort of looks like Israel got away with it for the moment. I could be wrong, but
Dan,
that's what appears to be the case.
Dan, do you mind if apologies for interrupting you just a second. Let's talk a bit about the Qatar's role and, of course, the US's role. They're both mediators in this conflict. However, Rubio just declared unwavering support for Israel. Qatar says it's going to carry on as a mediator in this conflict. Is there a way forward for diplomacy with mediators like this?
Well, the U.S. is not, but both are kind of mediators, but both are implicated because, the U.S. is obviously a staunch ally of Israel and an implacable enemy of Hamas, as I believe is most of the planet, to various degrees, whether they admit it or not. Qatar, meanwhile, it has been a patron of Hamas and has been a funder of the larger Muslim Brotherhood movement that is at loggerheads with much of the Sunni Arab world and is considered a terrorist organization in Egypt. So we're talking about implicated parties that nonetheless want to play a constructive role. And I do believe at this point, the question on everyone's minds, including Qatar, is how to bring about a situation where Hamas does in effect surrender and does in effect disarm. This may surprise some viewers, but Qatar joined the Arab League in the New York Declaration from July, calling on Hamas to disarm. And if Hamas did agree to disarm and hand over the Strip to another government, they would not only be doing what is undoubtedly the will of the overwhelming majority of the Gazan people, but they would end the war. Now, I have been highly critical of Israel's insistence on continuing the war because I do not think Hamas is going to do any such thing, and I think there are better ways to compel that outcome. But the outcome is desired by everyone, and especially and surprisingly, given the history, Qatar. So we have a complex and delicate situation here, where the Gaza Strip is being held hostage by what is now a fairly small group of truly engaged terrorists, with a lot of insurgents that they've recruited who are like 15 or 16 years old in the past 2 years to replace their fighters who've been killed.
Yes, Dan Perry, do stay with us. We have further updates from the region, where the United Nations Human Rights Chief, Volker Turk, has condemned Israel's airstrike in Qatar that targeted Hamas leaders, calling it a shocking breach of international law. Addressing the UN Human Rights Council, Turk warned that the September the 9th strike in Doha was an assault on regional peace and stability and undermined the integrity of global mediation efforts. He urged accountability for what he described as unlawful killings, while opening an urgent debate on the incident. We are once again joined by Dan Perry. Dan, many are arguing here that Israel broke international law by striking Qatar, a sovereign nation. Do you expect Israel to face any consequences either at the UN or from any other body in regards to this?
Israel won't face consequences at the UN because truly consequential actions at the UN occur from the UN Security Council, where the US can be expected to veto any anti-Israel measure. Israel could potentially face other consequences if Arab countries should break off relations or should suspend trade deals or things of this nature. Also, Europe is getting a little bit tired of Israel's continued insistence on fighting the war in this way. And just last week, the Ursula von der Leyen threatened to take measures against Israel and to maybe even ultimately expel Israel from its status as an associate member of the European Union. For sure, Israel can face consequences, but I don't think it will be purely about the strike in Qatar. The strike in Qatar was undoubtedly a violation of Qatar's sovereignty. That's obvious. But the notion that one never violates another's sovereignty is a little bit infantile. I mean, when the U.S. Took out Osama bin Laden, who was in Pakistan, another erstwhile U.S. ally, that was a violation of Pakistan's sovereignty. But Osama bin Laden was a demonic terrorist responsible for 9/11. The leaders of Hamas are a genocidal jihadist mafia. So the idea that you host them and they have impunity because your sovereignty prevails is an idea, but it's not the only idea in the world. So whereas for sure Qatar's sovereignty was absolutely violated, and you could argue that it also violated the fuzzy and highly subjective edifice of international law, the real issue is political. What's really supposed to happen here? How to end the war? Who cares enough about what? Does Qatar really care enough to cut off relations with Israel, which it has, and beneath the surface are pretty good? My guess is actually not.
Yes, do stay with us, Dan, as we further discuss the conflict. And we move over to the ground, where Israel has launched its ground assault as it continues its offensive in Gaza City. The military has unleashed a massive bombardment on the city overnight as Israeli troops move deeper into the territory's largest urban hub. Listen in to some Gaza City residents as they describe the current escalation.
قامت الطائرات بقصف للبيت هذا اللي هو بيت دار زكوت ابو كمال الله يرحمه عمي بكون وموجودين فيه طبعا تقريبا ما يعادل 50 نفر ما بين اطفال ونساء وما مش عارف انا ليش قصفوه يعني طلعنا اطفال اشلاء
بلغونا ان البرج هذا بده ينبني بده يهجم طلعنا نجري وهذا البرج اكثر برج امن وكل البرج امنه والاسرائيلي كما تدعي انه هذا برج فيه امور مشبوهه وكذا وهذا خاطئ هدف نتنياهو انه يخلينا نرجع ونطلع على الجنوب.
The Israeli military has said that it estimates that there are around 2,000 to 3,000 Hamas terrorists left in Gaza City. It's also said that approximately 350,000 people have left Gaza City before the new ground offensive started. Meanwhile, the United Nations Commission of Inquiry has concluded that Israel has committed genocide in Gaza. The Commission has also said that top Israeli officials, including Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, has incited these acts. The Israeli Foreign Ministry has rejected the report and called its findings distorted and false, while calling for abolishing the Commission. Israel's representative to the United Nations has also rejected the report, calling the Commission anti-Semitic. We are once again joined by Dan Perry. Dan, let's focus on this new offensive, which we are seeing continuing throughout the day. Israel has said that it estimates that 2,000 to 3,000 Hamas terrorists, as it calls them, remain in Gaza, justifying this new ground offensive. Where does Israel get these numbers from? And does these numbers support the scale of bombardment and displacement that we're seeing?
Israel has fairly good intelligence all over the Gaza Strip, and the nature of that intelligence obviously is human and SIGINT, and these are complex issues and somewhat confidential. I believe their numbers. Whether it supports the scale of the offensive is another question altogether, and it's very subjective and very political. You must know that the idea of continuing the war in Gaza and moving on the ground into Gaza City at this time is opposed by the security establishment in Israel, the National Security Council in Israel, the overwhelming tech, business, strategic, academic and journalistic community in Israel, and the population of Israel. So the government here is forcing the army to do something extremely unpopular. And the reason they're doing it is an open question. They can always say, well, Hamas has not yet been fully eradicated. And that's true. They haven't. But that argument could, sustain a continued forever war for many, many years into the future. These terrorist organizations, and they are terrorists, and they've hijacked the Gaza population, and it's a catastrophe that they've been allowed to flower.
Yeah.
They're very difficult to stamp out. The Americans never did stamp out the insurgency in Iraq. It just mutated into the Iraqi Shia militias that we see today, and they basically were completely failed. They failed completely in Afghanistan, and no one has succeeded in eradicating the Houthis in Yemen because it's so easy to hide arms, to get arms, and to pay children a few dollars to become militants, and that can be expected to continue in Gaza for some time. Moreover, Israel's made clear that they're allowing Hamas terrorists to flee the city along with the population. So all this really is going to do is saddle Israel with a direct occupation over close to 1 million people, because most of the population of Gaza hasn't fled, who can be trusted to be hostile, among whom there will be insurgents, and there will be constant booby-trapping of buildings and firefights with insurgents and explosives going off. And commando operations and civilians dying and hostages dying and soldiers dying. For what end? Because Israel, because of the radioactive idiocy of the current government of Israel, has refused to even discuss one time what should come after Hamas in Gaza, which is obviously the Palestinian Authority backed by the world with all kinds of reforms and so forth. They've refused to articulate it because the far right and the Israeli government won't allow it. So what this is leading to is an Israeli military administration over so many people that will be costly and deadly and achieve nothing. So quite apart from whether it's justified by the existence of 2,000 terrorists, is a wider question of Israel's complete lack of strategy.
Dan Parry, thank you very much for joining us. Always a pleasure to have you on the programme. We now move on and over to Europe for our next story, where the Polish Prime Minister, Donald Tusk, has said that Poland's State Protection Service has neutralised a drone operating over sensitive government locations, including Parkała Street and the Belvedere Palace. He also said that 2 Belarusian citizens were detained in connection with the incident, and the police are investigating the circumstances of that incident. Earlier, Poland had shot down suspected Russian drones in its airspace with the backing of aircraft from its NATO allies. Poland has accused Russia for the violation of its airspace, but Russia has denied it. Meanwhile, the Polish President Karol Nawrocki is due to arrive in Berlin for his inaugural visit. German President Frank-Walter Steinmeier plans to welcome his Polish counterpart with military honours in front of Bellevue Palace in Berlin to hold talks with him. After this, Nawrocki is expected to meet Chancellor Friedrich Merz for an exchange of views. We are now joined by Andrew Latham. He is a professor of international relations, and he joins us live from Minneapolis, USA. Thank you very much, Andrew. It's always a pleasure to speak to you. Let's start with the top. Prime Minister of Poland, Donald Tusk, says a drone flew over sensitive government sites in Warsaw. Do you see this as an isolated breach, or is this something you think is going to continue? Now we've seen 2 other, of course, instances of this, both in Poland itself and also, of course, in Romania just 2 days ago as well.
Well, good question. It remains to be seen. These 2 young guys could just be independent operators out for a lark, or they may be working directly or indirectly for Moscow. These drones were operated locally. There was no obvious transport dimension to it. They've been arrested, and we'll see how that shakes out. But the question is important because there's a bigger picture here, which is Russia's hybrid warfare, gray zone war campaign against Poland, of which the drone incursions a few days back were just one manifestation. There's GPS jamming, there's cyber warfare against hospitals and infrastructure. There's all kinds of forms of aggression that are below the threshold of armed aggression, the use of guns and bombs, but are nevertheless hurting Poland, undermining and weakening its infrastructure, its ability perhaps to support Ukraine. And that's got the Poles justifiably upset and taking measures, both practical, electronic countermeasures, for example, but also the new president Nawrocki's upcoming trip to Berlin. Surely he's going to ask not only for reparations from World War II, which he is, but also for German aid in countering this hybrid or gray zone warfare.
Yes, Andrew, let's dive into a little bit more about what you just spoke about there. Nawrocki's inaugural trip is to Berlin. Is this a symbolic reset in Polish-German relations after years of tensions between previous governments?
Well, I think that tension is not going away, and it's embodied in this incoming president, this new president, elected earlier in August. He's an historian by trade and has been an outspoken advocate of German reparations being paid to Poland for the abuses inflicted by the former on the latter during the Second World War. That's not going to change. That's why the visit, I think, was planned in the first place, was to make these demands both on moral grounds, but also domestic political grounds. This is still a live issue in Poland, if not in Germany. But on the other hand, and at the other pole, there's the Polish need for German support in this new gray zone battle space. And so it remains to be seen exactly how this new president is going to navigate these tensions. Is it going to be mostly about the Second World War, or is it going to be mostly about what some people are calling the prelude to the Third World War? And that remains to be seen. I rather suspect that he will be focused more on securing German aid for this new campaign that Russia has launched against Poland.
Andrew Latham, thank you very much for joining us on the programme, and thank you for taking the time. We now move over to the Indo-Pacific, where China's Coast Guard has fired a water cannon at a Philippine ship, multiple ships, near the disputed Scarborough Shoal in the South China Sea, accusing Manila of an illegal intrusion and the ramming of one of its vessels. The confrontation comes a week after Beijing approved plans to turn the shoal into a national nature reserve, a move defense analysts have warned would test Manila's response over the 150 square kilometre triangular chain of reefs and rocks. Simmering tensions have led to diplomatic rows in recent years, but no incidents have escalated into armed conflicts. Both sides accuse each other of provocations and trespassing, including water cannon use, boat ramming and dangerous manoeuvres, as well as jets shadowing Philippine aircrafts. This latest encounter between the two countries reportedly involved more than 10 Philippine ships, with China accusing them of illegally invading its territorial waters from different directions. In particular, Beijing has faulted Philippine Coast Guard vessel 3014, claiming it had disregarded solemn warnings from the Chinese side and deliberately rammed a Chinese Coast Guard vessel. China's foreign ministry has defended the firing of the water cannon, saying measures taken by its Coast Guard to safeguard territorial sovereignty and maritime rights were indisputable. Let's take a closer look at what the Chinese foreign ministry spokesman had to say.
黄岩岛是中国的固有领土，菲律宾派多艘公务船侵闯黄岩岛领海，严重侵犯中方主权和权益，严重破坏海上和平稳定。中方依法采取必要措施，维护自身领土主权和海洋权益，无可非议。事实再次证明，菲方在海上蓄意侵权挑衅，是导致局势紧张的根源。菲方应立即停止侵权挑衅，不要挑战中方维护自身合法权益的坚定决心。
We are now joined by Andrew K.P. Liang. He is a China strategist and he joins us live from Hong Kong. Thank you very much, Andrew, for joining us here on the programme. Andrew, reports say that 10 Philippine ships were involved in this confrontation. We have seen confrontations before, however, this amount of Philippine ships is substantial. Does this suggest that Manila is becoming more assertive in directly challenging Beijing's presence in the Scarborough Shoal?
It seems to be so, but then the confrontation in the South China Sea over the Scarborough Shoals is a broken record. It keeps on being played again and again and again. It's the question of whether the sound is louder or less loud. The thing is that this current Philippine government under Marcos is anti-China, anti-Beijing. And then the previous government under the third is pro-China, and the one before the third, Aquino, was anti-China, and before Aquino, Rubio, that's pro-China. So the Philippines is shifting from one playbook to the other just to balance the confrontation or the tussle between the two great powers in the region, between the United States and China. So the current Philippine government is tied to Americans' apron strings, and is playing by the American hymn book to contain China in the South China Sea, along with other countries like Japan and recently South Korea, but also previously the Quad, including India, Australia, Japan, and the United States. So this hymn book is being followed, and it's just more ships, and China is not responding the same way along with water cannons, because both China and the Philippines, I think, do not want a hot war, nor for that matter Philippines' paymaster, which is of course the United States, because if there is a hot war, the United States would be drawn into the conflict, and then of course the South China Sea is 6,000 miles away from the United States, and that's the last thing President Trump wants. But still, the Trump administration is playing all games. On the one hand, trying to broker a deal over tariffs, and trying to engineer a meeting between President Xi and President Trump, so that President Trump can use it as a just to show that he's seems to be very successful. But behind the scenes is part of the China containment, which is already anchored in the South China Sea by the first island chain centered in Okinawa with a lot of American assets, the second island chain centered in Guam, again with American assets, and then, as I said, with the American allies in Japan, to a certain extent South Korea, and more so the Philippines, because there is a defense agreement between the Philippines and the United States. So we're seeing more of this hymn book being played, and both sides understands this. But in fact, this is as you pointed out, I mean, there are more ships, but then both sides do not want hot conflict.
Yes, Andrew K.P. Leung, thank you very much for joining us here on the programme. Pleasure to have you. Well, that is all that we have time for, but we will continue to bring you more updates from around the world. Thank you for joining us.